The Process, a podcast about creativity and experimental music. In the world of experimental music, outcomes and accolades for creators can be uncertain and at times seem far and few between. Therefore, creators and practitioners of experimental music must embrace the one thing they will always have complete control over: the process. This podcast aims to understand this creative process by listening to new works and discussing them with their creators. Each episode focuses on one creator and their music. Understanding how and why they create can inform aspiring creatives and help audiences better understand and navigate experimental music. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and I'll be your host as we explore the world of experimental music, creativity, and the human need to find purpose in their world and lives. This is The Process. Bridging the ancient with the new, electroacoustic duo Vessels to Motherland create a music of its own breed, steering between heavy industrial and evocative ambient, navigating through seas of psychedelia, and journeying within humans and robots alike. Vessels to Motherland consists of composer, producer, pianist Danica Borisavljevic and composer, producer, violinist Nikita Morozov. Their new debut album is a collection of songs by machines imbued with human urges, screaming out of metal shells and memories of distant worlds, cries for lost connections, dreams of a digital utopia, and soliloquies on the human condition. On today's episode, we listen to Oiseau from their brand new debut album.
Together we started electronic music. That was joint effort.
Yeah.
But before that, we were a lot in contemporary music, and I was for about 10 years. I was solely playing contemporary and avant-garde music. So a lot of improv and extended techniques in our music comes from there. Like for example, George Crumb. Yeah. Then, for example, Tristan Murail. Spectralism. Some of the harmonies comes from there. So it kind of all came together in Vessels. And before that, I didn't do any electronic music. It was always a dream, but it's the technology is always, it's hard to go over that bump. And that was the struggle. That was the learning curve. Yeah. And that's what we did together.
Yeah.
So that was that obstacle that we didn't even have the equipment before, or we didn't even know where to start. So we basically started together to do this like 2.5 years ago, I would think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, about 3 years ago we started together. I mean, I have a feeling that like our background as, contemporary or avant-garde classical musicians, it's kind of like subconscious almost, because we grew up in that world and it's there. And when we make music, like that world just shows up no matter what, in some kind of way. It's like filtered out. But for like something that we're actually like focusing on, I think, when we're starting a song for like the process. Very often, at least for me, it's sound design. And we take synthesizers, for example, the OP1 synthesizer. It's really central to the sound of Vessels to Motherland, the OP1. And we tweak the sound. We find a sound that sounds amazing. And that sound invites an interval, a melody, a harmony, a chord progression, and then we go from there.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned, kind of our history of music, or how we studied music. Did we study at a conservatory? Was it a traditional conservatory? Where we're learning new music and all the kind of coding that we have. So I feel like probably do you find this when you sit down in front of the synthesizer? Do you hear the voices? I hear voices when I sit down to compose, and they say like, you can't repeat something more than 3 times. Like you can't have an ostinato. You can't, like all these like can't. So do you, when you at some point in the process, do you hear those voices of your either teachers?
You have to shut them up. You have to tell them to shut up. I think that's the beginning of it. Yeah. And I think it's a big difference of playing the score a certain way as we are expecting in school, because there's a lot of expectations. First of all, from the score itself, it's written. Then it's a certain style. Then there's a certain way how you're supposed to sound. There's all those suppose in the schooling. Absolutely. But then I think contemporary music it's crucial. It should be much more in schools and in early age. Mm-hmm. I'm a big believer in that, because I find it a different world. You start seeing music differently by studying contemporary scores, because nobody ever played it before. There's no, it's a new world that you have to approach the score a bit differently, because you're discovering this thing. Nobody ever played it before, so you don't know what and maybe you even read score more decently than you do with Bach, because you actually have to pay more attention to what composer said.
Right, because there's not just like 200 years of performance history. Yeah, exactly.
So I think with that approach, it already started that when I go to my synth, I don't hear that many voices what I'm supposed to do or not. So
I'm very fortunate not to hear them either, actually.
I guess you're not supposed to be hearing voices, right? I think that's all right, so you're in front of the synthesizer, and I love this idea. So you create a sound that sort of inspires you, or you come up with an idea on the synthesizer that you're like, this is something that we can expand upon. So where do you go next? Do you turn to your acoustic instruments? Is this something, do you start working in a DAW and sequencing? Where do you go next after you come up with this kind of like sound design or sound idea?
We have a couple of processes going on. It's a bit different when we create songs, and I think it's different than when we play live. When we play live, is this keeping the structure but maintaining the chaos? I think that will be the best explanation for our music. And I find, for example, writing songs much more difficult in this structure environment, that you have to maintain the freshness and the idea and the emotion you had. Maybe you should talk about that, because I think you do, and Oiseau does your song, because we do songs separately. Oiseau is song written by Nikita solely. When we perform it live, then this merging comes together.
Yeah, we kind of have 2 types of songs. One type is where it's like, for example, Oiseau is, I sat down at 6 a.m, made this bass line. And then layered a bunch of stuff. And then the other type is when we improvise together, and it becomes more organic, sometimes more ambient. And then when we play live, it's a combination of both. So we have the structure of the songs that we made separately. We combine it with our improvs. But so with the sound design, where do we go next? It's directly into the DAW. We record a line. So for example, with Oiseau, it started with the bass. And it's this very square bass. It's just 8 notes. But I really tried not to loop 8 notes, because it's, I don't want it to sound the same exactly. So I put a click track, and I recorded myself playing it over and over again. And that's what we hear, because there are little imperfections here and there. Absolutely. And so although it's just 8 songs repeated, like it's just whole notes, then it still sounds kind of human, organic. And then from the bass, so that bass got recorded, and over that came the drums. And the drums, there are about 7 layers of drums. And actually, I gave them names. They have like different different kinds of birds. You have different like the little bird, the fat bird. I think they have a scratchy bird. And
Messiaen would be happy. Messiaen
I was going to say. Yeah.
But they're not singing though. They're not. Yeah, they're
not singing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, and then we have the bass and the drums, and then we have this as a unit. And then on top of that, I improvised several layers of OP1 lines. And so the bass is very square. It's 8 notes. It's very kind of rigid. And what I improvised on top were like these notes that were overheld, suspensions, anticipating a chord. You have dissonances. And so the lines that I put on top of that square line were asymmetrical, unpredictable, with glissandos and stuff like that.
So when you're putting, just in general, when you're putting a song like Oiseau together, are you envisioning, okay, well, Danica is going to play this particular part, or there's going to be this happening as well? So do you, when you're creating these parts, do you leave space for maybe the live performance or for other elements that might come in later, or is it every note is here and this is every note?
It's the latter, the second one. It's the second one. So the tracks we created, we weren't thinking about the live performance. We just made it like, okay, this is asking for this kind of line. We're adding this line. We're adding this, and then performing it kind of becomes a hell. But then, and then what we do is that we before performing becomes very different from the original version. And it kind of deviates quite a lot. We're about to release this whole video of our performance at Gallery MC from December. We'll release it in a couple of weeks. And we played Oiseau there, and it was really quite different. Like you can hear the bass, you can hear the drums, they're recognizable, but everything else, all those lines that were asymmetrical, unpredictable, completely different.
Basically, we had to come up with our own way of playing, because we made this song and I was like, what the hell do we do now? How do we play this? Because it's it's so structured, and it kind of does not make sense just to play a song like a DJ,
you could just press play. Yeah, you could just press
and
play.
That's not that's like there's no point to it. And then we really had to come up with a new way of doing stuff, which is, I think, is the point of all of this. And that's why this is so exciting, to actually come up, like, you literally don't know what you're going to do tomorrow. And you have a performance tomorrow. So you have to.
That sounds like a nightmare, a recurring nightmare I have. Yeah.
One of the three.
Yeah.
But it's incredible that the realization that you can actually do it. And I think many people should know that this is possible. You can do it. You have to abandon every fear of failure. There's no failure there, because it's new. It's your own song. I think you're entitled to play with it. And with that attitude, I think that's the right attitude to actually be like to do this.
Yeah, and I think when we improvise, there's a certain feeling in the music, like that you don't know what's going to come next, and there's a certain magic moment that can be created with that. It becomes more hypnotizing than when it's predictable. And I think we both really like to take risks in our performances live. Really like not to play it safe and to go crazy. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that's our process, to take risks and to dare. Oiseau, it's I call it it's a hymn dedicated to the power of electrical memory birds, and what I mean by that is that the birds they seem they're so I'm thinking when I'm thinking of Oiseau, I'm thinking of a sparrow, and the birds they're tiny, they're seemingly cute, and they're so frail, yet there's this power behind them. It's like this invisible power, which is, I don't know, nature perhaps, and especially when you see like huge flocks of birds in the sky, like it's just there's this power that often goes like unexpressed. And with Oiseau, with that very beginning, you have that juxtaposition. You have the little quirky, scratchy drums that go, they're very fast and they have a very short life and they're like very erratic. They go left and right. And then you have this bass, which is almost oppressive. And the bass is constant. It doesn't stop except for that dreamy section in the middle. It doesn't stop. It's very sustained. And that's kind of like what it's going for. It's like these two contrasts, but it's also not contrast. It's kind of the same thing.
Well, speaking of that, I noticed at about 2.5 minutes that the drums or the scratching sort of stops and we get a break from that. And then there's a wonderful moment, I think it's at about 2.5 minutes, where then the drums return. And now the synthesizer parts that were sort of more floating, they seem to be now sort of like side-chained and they're sort of reacting to the sort of rhythm of the drums. So can you talk a little bit about what you did at that break, like why you had that break and how that kind of moved the piece forward?
The drop. Yeah, the drop.
Oh, yeah. See, yeah, that's like, this is great. We can say drop now. And
absolutely, yes. Well, that drop.
Forget about it. In Barrio, if you mention drop, like, it'd be like, what, you dropped something. Yeah. But go ahead.
It's called the climax.
Yeah.
Okay. The drop. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a very emotional drop. And I mean, it's on the drop, there's an LFO tool. I don't know if you know that plugin. LFO tool. It just comes in sectioning the line like into 16th notes like this on the drop. And melodically, it also goes high up, and you have the bass appearing super low. The melody goes super high, so it feels like there's this huge expansion there. Yeah, and also there's a crazy left-right panning right before the drop.
Talking about drops, for example, we know a drop from dance music, and usually is the cheesiest, like just for the sake of the effecting.
Sure.
Technically well done, but I think we learned that. But as we know, we listen to Mahler. We know so if you can do a drop that's going to have an emotional impact, not just a sonic impact that is done in dance music, and also to figure out the technology, I think that's really, really important. Apart from emotional side and everything what you're trying to express, I think knowing the tools, it makes all the difference. Then you can really combine and make this, you can make technically good drop that sounds really good, because there are really technical issues there in drop. It's not going to sound massive or it's not going to sound impactful. But if you don't have emotion in it, then you have it's not. So if you manage to combine both, I think that's really good. I think that's what happened in his song. That's why it's like this explosion. I think it happened. I mean, it sounds like that for many reasons, basically. That's not how much freedom does it allow. It's literally the point of what we are doing right now, especially coming from classical surrounding. But also I have to say, as a female in art, especially from Eastern Europe, there's a lot of expectations what you're supposed to be doing, the way how you're supposed to look, and stuff that you're supposed to do in the house. I think that's still happening. So it feels like a luxury. It's not supposed to be luxury. It's supposed to be literally the point. So for me, this is really how to say it. It really triggered me. This question really triggered me because I really think that's the point. I don't see it any other way.
Yeah. And I find it interesting that you in music, at least for example with improvisation, I feel more free if I have at least a little bit of constraints, some like limits. Absolutely. Like for example, any game, like if you're playing a game with somebody, you want some kind of rules. If there are no rules, you can't play a game. So I find that really interesting because then freedom is, you can't just have like pure freedom. You have to set some rules and then you operate within that. And then what is freedom if you need rules for it? Like what kind of freedom is that? And it's a really fascinating subject.
And then you can get really meta and be like, well, is there really freedom? Are we really free from it? Like it just can get, then you'll have to sit and compose for a few hours, right? To just work through it. Right. Yeah. But yeah, one thing I always thought of about it too is often as musicians and creatives, we have to do other things throughout the day. And sometimes those are wonderful, responsibilities we have to our family and children and things. But other times they're paying the bills. And I guess I was making the assumption that a creative lifestyle is in contradiction to like paying rent. Or is at odds with that. So often I'm asking people, like, oh, you teach or you do these other things and, how much freedom or how much creative time are you able to have with that path?
Well, we both teach. And so I think it's important not to actually tie creativity with bills, at least at the beginning.
To have them separated.
To have that separated so that is not dictating what are you writing. I think that's important for me. I don't know. Yeah. And that does not fuel my creativity, for example. Some other things are fueling it, more inner stuff that are not tied to money, for example. I know with some people it's different, it's totally fine.
Sure.
But we do teach, but also, in teaching you can be creative as well. You can what we did is, but that's a long story. We are teaching kids electronic music, basically. And
Fantastic.
There are 7-year-olds who are, you can maybe send you a link later, it's going to be broadcasted. There's, it's 7-year-olds who made their own tracks and then improvised over.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of this, what we do in the studio that we can actually teach and then, get money for it.
Yeah. And I love that aspect of teaching too, where because the student is going through the same process that we toil over all the time, that you gain some insight when you're like, oh, they're struggling with that too. Or like, oh, they overcame this. Like, this is what they did. I'm like, we're not just stealing drops from students, but you know what I mean? Like we're gaining because they're going through the process too. There's sort of that camaraderie, but also then, some insight into our own process. Yeah.
I mean, we have 24 hours in a day and you don't need 24 hours to pay the bills. No. I think that you can always make some time for creativity. You can, no matter what. I mean, you can, before moving to New York, I was working 40 hours a week in the hospital as a security agent for a year, saving some money to move here. Yeah. And that's actually probably the year that I really started to explore experimental music and avant-garde music and improvising in like jazz clubs. And I discovered John Zorn and, like just crazy stuff like that. And so it's interesting actually when I think about it that, I was working 40 hours a week in the most mundane job, with like cameras and opening doors and stuff like that. And yet for me, that was the time when, I wasn't taking violin lessons at that time. I was just by myself. And that's when I kind of revolutionized myself a little bit. I opened new doorways, new ideas came, my playing changed, my whole perception of what music could be Also, there was a Stockhausen Festival in Montreal at that time, which really had a powerful impact on me.
Sure. Yeah. So, sometimes people express that too, that their quote unquote day job sometimes fuels their, creativity, and vice versa. I always wonder that too. I wonder if I just could be creative all the time, if I would get anything done. I feel like if I just had the whole day to write music, I don't know, I'd probably get resentful very quickly, but maybe that's my own issues.
But also being creative is not, I don't find it that easy. We need a break, and maybe like the structured life of actually going and doing something like teaching a lesson actually helps you with creativity, because you're not being creative. Creativity can be messy, difficult. You're hitting walls. It's not always this, wonderful thing. Most of the time, it's not this wonderful thing.
No, it is like an absolute struggle. It's an absolute struggle.
That's a great point.
Sometimes you just need to walk away. Like when you're having an argument with somebody, sometimes you just need to walk away from the piece and just say, all right, I'll come back tomorrow, or I'll come back later. But I
think that's a good balance, basically. It's good. I think it's good to enjoy, like cooking dinner or something like that.
Sure.
It's amazing because you're, and not to feel guilty that you're not creating at that moment, not to fall for those traps, because it's like you're resting your brain.
And then it can help your creativity.
Exactly, because that being creative all the time, I would not wish that to anybody. I would find it very difficult.
Yeah, I think that would be really daunting. And then, having like a year-long commission or something like that, I feel like that would just be a nightmare, because you'd have all the time to create, and then such a long deadline that you could just kind of think and rethink. And
it's hard. We need break from that as well.
Sure. Yeah. The thing we love to do and need to do, we need a break from that too, right? Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic talking with you both. Before I let you go, can you tell us where we can go to find out more about Vessels to Motherland and the new album?
You can go on vesselstoMotherland.com. That's our website. We have a Bandcamp page. You can pre-order the album. It's about to release on Friday.
Oh, that's right.
So it's called Machine Leader, song cycle for cyborgs. You can find us on Instagram, Vessels to Motherland. Follow us on Facebook. Very soon, in a couple of weeks, we'll be releasing this awesome video of a live performance we did in December. A really nice videography on that one.
we basically founded the festival. It's like a 3-part festival that we founded. Literally, it happened like a month ago. The first part is Kids on Synths, kids with their own age 6 to 12. And then second part is contemporary piano. And it's piano after 1950s, and it has to be at least one composer of color. That was the requirement for the festival. And the third part is electroacoustic. But as this was a pilot program, we didn't take submissions for the festival, but we played. So that the whole thing is going to be released.
Awesome.
But probably if people go to our website, I think it's going to be posted.
Yep,
there.
It'll be there, so they can go to check that out. That sounds fantastic. If you enjoyed this episode, please check out other episodes in the series, and as always, like, subscribe, or leave a comment on your preferred podcasting app. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and this has been The Process.